Hello, everybody. I just fired up. Gonna try to answer your question, give you a bit of context on how we start with charts, and I'll give you a bit of a different run, obviously, than for the normal class group, since we're all astrologers. This was just a presentation I'm hacking through to give you a bit of perspective, and it's one I gave back in March for the World Astrology Day, I think you call it. So I'm just gonna skip through some of the slides that. Because I'm not obviously presenting to you. And this is, I guess, where we can start with your question, Marcella, around how do we start with the chart. So for us, we start with the chart in terms of respecting and kind of honoring that divine spark. And this is giving you 5 layers of our Huber approach, and that is modeled after, you might see a little bit of relationship between this and the egg diagram. So the circle in the center is our divine spark. I call it the soul, whatever you want to call it, but that's what it is. And from there, we really start with that. We start there. We don't draw any lines through that. We respect that as this, unimaginable, really, entity, place, our home base. And from there, we look to find an image really within the chart, and I'll show you this in some charts later, but since it's a holistic astrology, we use our eyes and our senses. We turn off our mercurial brains at the initial onset, and we invoke our Jupiter senses to really get a whole handle of the whole chart. So when we start from that center circle, and then we move outward to that second layer here, this aspect pattern, the aspect pattern itself is really interesting and really cool, and from an astrological perspective, highly valuable. What it allows us to do is, based on specific orbs and well-researched orbs and aspects, we only use 30-degree aspects, what we get is this kind of conscious, unconscious motivation of the individual before we get it racing down the highway down to planets and signs and everything else. So we literally, I'll daydream or visualize, if you will, or try to come up with some images that can really hold the gestalt of the individual by looking at that motivation. There's not really much. This is kind of a horrible chart to look at a picture in it, so I'll show you some more later on. The next layer out relates to our June studies of psychological functions or psychological drives, and we call our planets psychological drives, and we treat them the same way that most astrology does, give or take. We can get into that stuff later on. But basically, though, this divine spark, number one, ignites the aspect pattern, and the aspect pattern then kind of lights up like Christmas tree lights, if you will, the planets, these psychological drives. So from there, we have this emanating desire of quality of our birth chart that's shooting outward, that's trying to express itself and lighting up the planetary drives. The next layer out is, of course, the zodiac. So obviously it's our collective unconscious. It's always something that we're relating to and tapping to, and it provides the costumes and textures to the to the psychological drives. It's the zodiac. We know what the zodiac is. And last but not least, we do things a bit differently. Number 5 is the houses. So we put the houses on the outside because we put a lot of emphasis in the house system in Huber astrology, and the houses really represent where things play out, whether literally or figuratively. Really, what is the 11th house in terms of chosen groups and specialized groups of where you want to belong to and your chosen ethics, or really what is the 4th house in terms of family and roots and tradition. So what does that physically look like in the world, and or at least, like I said, at an imaginary level. So we put it on the outside for that reason, as the qualities from the circle, the center circle in the center emanate outwards. It has to land somewhere, and we place the environment as a natural endpoint for that. Okay, I'll skip that. So yes, again, just really it's mandala. It's the sum versus the parts, and we give a lot of emphasis. This is my chart here. You might recognize it, or maybe not. I think I just gave my birth details, but I had to spend a lot of time even going through coursework of looking at what kind of image I saw in my chart. And long story short, I see this old school steamship image that there's the bow and the stern, the smokestack, and like a sail. So it's like an old school steamship that's slowly trudging along and kind of held in a bit of tension here from family roots, trying to make its way to the top of that chart. So, I mean, and so on and so forth. I could go further into it, but that's literally where we start. We try to form a real picture in our head of what's trying to express itself. Kind of weird, eh? So for what Bruno said about the chart pattern, viewed in its entirety, the aspect structure is a symbolic representation of our consciousness or unconsciousness formed by the life energies made available to us. That's why it's possible to see the inner motivation inherent in a chart. I can't even express to you how important and how interesting it is to spend time looking at the overall mandala picture that emerges and how it really reflects that overall person. Okay, so there's 3 charts we use, obviously, in Hebrew astrology. So we talked about the natal chart. We also use a nodal chart and a house chart. The natal chart uses the cock-house system. The nodal chart, which I'll explain, and the house system use equal house. The nodal chart, if you believe in reincarnation, then some past energies and lifetimes are expressed in here. Not any one lifetime, but many. So in mine, I have Neptune in the 12th here, so it's really that can reflect even the Christ principle of probably a lot of time spent as a monk, or wouldn't be a monk, I guess, but within the realms of 12th house of really ontological matters and deep studies, and probably a lot of alone time, probably in a Christian realm is one way of looking at that. The reason we get awareness of this, or how can we say these things, is through a bit of research with depth psychology and image associations and that type of thing. Carl Jung did a lot of that with his Ricosi centers and depth psychologists. Years and years of empirical research, but arguably one of the more nebulous considerations for astrology. What else can we see? If you're not into incarnations, then you can simply treat this as your subliminal self or your shadow. So your shadow persona that we don't have access to, obviously. Very, very, very deep unconscious motivations. And it's non-rational, timeless. But it's really interesting because you can live in that chart. And what we do is we largely look at the differentiation between your nodal chart and your birth chart to see, where the issues lie. Because we can see that it could be something really stuck way down deep in there. And that's what the nodal chart provides us with, that information. I'm just doing a half job explaining it, just not to bore you guys and just to give you a bit of information. So there's our natal chart. That's our game plan for this life. And our house chart. So our house chart is very interesting. It's our conditioning. It's what the school teacher, it's our family of origin, it's our parents, it's our religion of origin, what they saw a subjective view of us looking at from the outside in. So it's equal houses. If you can think of this, all the houses are the same. And this is kind of like you're staring back, perhaps looking outward, maybe beyond the zodiac and downward at the person. So you have these equal houses because you're staring at it from that perspective. It's not skewed as if you're standing on the earth looking up. And as a result, you see the actual skewed. The zodiacs are actually different sizes. So it's kind of funky. The good news about it is that it's conditioning. So depending on who you are and how far you've made it, you can choose to pick from this as a movable feast, obviously. And we can see the difference between something that's very inherited within your natal chart or subliminal in your nodal, and then obviously your house chart. If it's just conditioning environment, you can, it's less imprinted maybe, as we know that just depends on the conditioning. But that's what that represents. Very cool and very powerful for clients. That's it. I just want to give you a quick run through. I won't go on a tangent for the rest of my presentation of the 3 charts. And a lot of time was spent with Astrologer figuring out the orbs and the aspects and the aspect patterns and you name it. So yeah, that's just a quick crash course. Let me know what you think. Thanks a lot.